we're going to dive right into the machinery of your own mind. I mean, think about it. We rely on our memories for literally everything, from tiny things like where you put your keys to the big stuff like who you are. But what if I told you that entire system is surprisingly fragile, constantly changing, and can sometimes get things, well, dangerously wrong?
So let me ask you this. Could you trust your own memory to set someone free or to lock them up for years? I mean, really think about that. If you were the only person who saw a crime, would you bet somebody's entire life on how well you remember a face? It's a huge question, and the answer is way more complicated than you'd think.
Okay, let's look at a real case that brings this all to life. A woman named Sneha, she's exhausted after a long day, and she sees a guy rob a fruit truck. He steals a whole crate of bananas. So she tells the police what she saw, and a few days later, she goes to the station and confidently points to a guy in a lineup. Case closed, right? Nope. At the trial, a memory expert takes the stand, and the suspect walks free. So the big question for us is, why? To solve this little mystery, we first got to understand how our memory actually works.
To get to the bottom of Sneha's case, we have to start with the basic architecture of memory, and trust me, it's probably not what you're picturing in your head.
You know, we all kind of think our minds are like this big, organized library, that our memories are just these little books sitting on a shelf, and when we need one, we just pull it out. But that's not it at all. A much better way to think about it is like a spider web, a massive, intricate web where every memory is just one little point connected by thousands of threads to other bits of information. Sights, sounds, feelings, you name it.
So if our mind is this giant tangled web, how in the world do we find one specific memory? Well, we follow the threads. Psychologists call these threads retrieval cues. You know, a song that comes on the radio, the smell of fresh-cut grass, walking into a certain room. These are all triggers that help us navigate that web and pull a memory forward. And here's where it gets really cool. A lot of the time, these cues work without us even knowing it. It's a process called priming. It's even been called memoryless memory because it happens completely under the surface. It's like this invisible force that wakes up old connections and helps jog our memory.
And this priming happens in a few key ways. For one, it's context dependent. We've all done this. You walk into the kitchen, totally forget why you went in there, and you have to walk back to the living room to remember. The place itself is the cue. Then, it can be state dependent. Memories you form when you're, say, all hyped up on coffee are easier to remember when you're in that state again. And finally, it's mood congruent. Ever notice how when you're having a bad day, you suddenly remember every other bad thing that's ever happened? Your mood becomes a retrieval cue.
Okay, so we've got this incredible web of memories. But as you know, that web is not perfect. Far from it. So let's look at the simple, everyday ways it just completely fails us.
This chart explains something we've all experienced. The serial position effect. Say you make a mental grocery list and then forget to write it down. You're almost guaranteed to remember the first couple of things you thought of, that's the primacy effect, and the last few things, that's the recency effect. But all that stuff in the middle, poof, gone. It just gets lost in the shuffle.
So why do we forget? Well, it usually boils down to one of three things. First, we just fail to encode the memory. You can't remember something you never really paid attention to in the first place. For Sneha, she was stressed and tired. She encoded the jacket and the bananas, sure, but maybe not the color of the guy's shoes. Second, there's just storage decay, the natural fading of memories over time. And third, retrieval failure. This is that maddening tip-of-the-tongue feeling. The memory's in there, you know it is, you just can't find the right thread to pull on.
And sometimes we can't find that thread because the web is just too cluttered. We call this interference. There are two kinds. Proactive interference is when old stuff gets in the way of new stuff. Think about your old password. Your brain just keeps serving it up when you're trying to remember the new one. The opposite is retroactive interference. That's when new information makes it hard to remember the old stuff, like when you learn a new language and suddenly you're getting rusty in one you learned years ago.
All right, now we are getting to the absolute core of our mystery. Because forgetting, that's not even the most shocking thing our minds can do. What's way more profound and a little unsettling is that our minds don't just lose memories. They actively change them.
And this leads us to an absolutely crucial idea. Your memory is not a video recording. It's not playback. It is reconstruction. Every single time you recall an event, you are pulling little bits and pieces from that spider web and you're filling in the gaps with your best guesses. And every time you tell that story, the memory itself can change. You are literally rewriting your own past. So just how fragile is this whole process? Well, check out this landmark experiment by the brilliant memory researcher Elizabeth Loftus. She showed people a video of a car accident. Afterwards, she asked one group a pretty simple question. How fast were the cars going when they hit each other?
But then she asked a second group almost the same question, but she changed just one little word. How fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? That one word, smashed, made a huge difference. The people who heard it guessed much higher speeds. But here is the truly wild part. A week later, they were twice as likely to remember seeing broken glass in the video, even though there was no broken glass. This is the misinformation effect. That leading word didn't just influence their guess, it literally changed their memory of the event.
This kind of misinformation can also lead to something called source misattribution, or source amnesia. This is when you remember a piece of information perfectly, like a person's face, but you completely forget where you saw it. You attribute the memory to the wrong time, the wrong place, the wrong context, and this is the final key to unlocking Sneha's case.
All right, we have all the pieces now. The web of associations, the fact that we reconstruct our memories, the power of misinformation. Let's go back to the banana thief and see how this all adds up for the fragile eyewitness. So why was that man set free? It wasn't because Sneha was lying. It's because her memory, like all our memories, was a reconstruction. The expert probably argued for source misattribution. See, Sneha did recognize the man's face, but not from the crime. She recognized him because he was the barista who had served her coffee earlier that exact same day. Her brain grabbed the right face, but put it in the wrong story. You combine that with the stress of the event, maybe some leading questions, and the fact that she retold the story over and over, and her confident identification just completely falls apart. And this isn't just some fascinating psychological quirk, this has absolutely devastating real-world consequences. According to the Innocence Project, a jaw-dropping 75% of prisoners who were later proven innocent by DNA evidence were originally convicted based on mistaken eyewitness testimony. 75%. So what this all shows us is that memory isn't some factual archive of our past. It's a living, breathing thing. It's an active, creative, and deeply personal story. We are all, in a very real way, just the stories we tell ourselves, stories that we're constantly editing and revising. So I'll leave you with this final thought. If your memory is a story that is never truly finished, a story that changes a little bit with every single telling, who then is the final author of your past?